Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Kepler Live. I'm definitely feeling, with my cup of coffee, like today is Monday. It is the Tuesday after Memorial Day. I ate a lot of hot dogs yesterday. We're talking to Jillene, and I'm wondering how her holiday was.
Hello and good afternoon here from the East Coast.
All right. So Jillene Santoro is one of our math teachers here at Kepler. And she taught a math teacher during our special spring. She taught a math class during our special spring term. And you have several classes coming up this fall. I actually do want to get into a couple of them more deeply later on, but maybe you can kind of run us through the gamut of classes that you'll be teaching this fall.
Well, this fall we have Algebra 1 with integrated geometry and Algebra 2 with integrated geometry, and also pre-calculus that also includes geometry as well. So if you haven't had your full unit or full course of geometry, it will count for half of a credit for geometry as well.
Any of those courses or one in particular?
Any of those will. Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Okay. So, so basically, Jillene Santoro is our math teacher, and she, so you can follow with her through your high school career if you start early enough. Now, maybe tell us a little bit about your background in math, and then also your background as a homeschooling mama, because I think that background is going to come into play during our conversation. And as we get started and talking about your background, Scott Postma says, yay, a fellow Air Force vet.
Yes, I am. So I graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in '94, and I was supposed to originally go to a missile silo, but by the grace of God, we had 6 slots available to go to the Air Force Institute of Technology. And I was able to hop on one of those slots and receive my master's degree directly out of the Air Force Academy. Mm. And so I did that. And my bachelor's was in operations research and my master's degree in operational analysis. And if people are not familiar with operations research, it's a combination of math, economics, management, and computer science. Mm. And so it's an interdisciplinary degree. And then I was served in the Air Force until my oldest was born. And then I separated from the Air Force, but I did also marry another Air Force officer, and he retired after 20 years and is now working as a Department of Defense contractor down on one of the Air Force bases. Okay. And then our oldest child also is serving, but we're still trying to figure out how 2 Air Force people ended up with an Army kid. But he is currently at West Point as a freshman. And then we have 2 other children as well, 2 younger children, also teenagers. The youngest will be 16 later this week. And then our daughter is 17, and then the oldest is 19.
Okay, wow, all right. And now this freshman at West Point, is he an incoming freshman, or did he just finish his freshman year?
He just finished his plebe year, his freshman year, and he completed the last quarter of it at home.
Right. Yeah. So that was what I wanted to ask. So I guess I'm sure he was working independently and diligently, but yes. maybe a little bit of homeschooling coming back for this guy.
Yes, we have quite the jokes about homeschooling West Point because he has been homeschooled his entire life. I entered homeschooling kicking and screaming, honestly. It was not what I had planned to do. My mother is a teacher, my father is a pastor, and my plan was to follow in the footsteps that my parents laid, and I was planning to go back to work so that we could put our kids in the Christian schools. Mm-hmm. And the Lord said, no, I have other plans for you. So that's how we entered homeschooling. And so all 3 of my children have been homeschooled since birth. You start teaching them right away. Mm-hmm. And the oldest did graduate, and our daughter will graduate in 2021, and then the youngest in 2022.
Well, it's really interesting to me that you say that you entered homeschooling kicking and screaming. And I think that's an indication of how aware you were, having this family background of education. Because usually when homeschooling parents say they entered it kicking and screaming, it's because they had to switch, right, for whatever reason, they switched from a government school or from a private school to homeschooling. And so they were already kind of used to school. But you've homeschooled your kids, from birth. But so even before your kids had been to school, you already knew that homeschooling would be a big thing, right? It would be that you were taking on a lot. I find that pretty interesting. And when I started homeschooling in 8th grade as a kid, I mean, and then I went through high school, which is the opposite pattern of what often happens. But yeah, my mom, who was a teacher, was filled with trepidation, and it's a big chunk, and it's something that you're not taking on being a teacher as a homeschooling parent. It's a whole other animal that includes being a teacher. So you've been in the trenches, you've been through the wars.
Yes.
All right, so I want to talk about. I noticed that you sent me an email actually saying that you were not going to be in dress code.
Correct.
You're
I decided
wearing
to go a little more casual today. So
you're wearing a T-shirt. Yeah, tell us about this T-shirt.
Well, my youngest, like I said, he will be 16 later this week, and he and I enjoy the math jokes T-shirts or hats. And the T-shirt that I'm wearing says "Math, the only place where people can buy 66 watermelons and no one wonders why." And one of our other favorite T-shirts is "The square root of -4 = 2. It's all fun and games until someone loses an eye."
Hey.
And so, no, and I enjoy math, but I also see math more as a language. And I've heard that the ability to make and understand puns is considered to be a higher level of a language development, because when you can understand the context and you can understand the grammar, and you can understand the jokes, it shows more of an understanding than just the basic concepts.
Yes, no, that's right. That's absolutely right. As a language teacher, I can affirm that. That you have to be, you're immersed enough in the language that you quickly see the double entendres and and actually, I'm gonna use what you just said in the future to justify my dad jokes to my family.
I would say math jokes do fall very much in the lines of dad jokes. And oftentimes when we wear our math shirts out, it often is the dads who will laugh and say, "Hey, I like your shirt."
Yeah.
So more often.
I can picture that. That's wonderful. And I also love that you could casually and realistically just utter the words when we go out with a math shirt. So apparently this is the thing. How many math joke shirts do you own?
I have 2 of them. However, my youngest has 3 or 4, and he's about to get another one for his birthday later this week. So.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So now, does your youngest, does he love math, or does he just love math puns?
I would say he does enjoy math. It would be one of his subjects that he prefers. Yes, sometimes dad jokes are very funny.
Sorry, I was making a face and stop while you were talking. I apologize.
But no, so he does enjoy math. And actually, all my children do enjoy math on some level or another. Some of them have to work harder at it or prefer the more applicable math to the more theoretical math, but they all are good at math in their own ways. But my husband also was a math major, so they almost didn't have a choice.
Yeah, right. Now, so we had the 66 watermelon. You've got the 66 watermelon still on display there, and no one wonders why. And you worked with math immediately in a practical way, but not everybody works with math following their education.
Oh, I disagree. I think everybody works with math. It just depends on the level that you work with math. Whether you're cooking, whether you're trying to figure out how many chores you need to do in order to buy the toy that you want to save for. There's math in everyday life. So everybody needs to work with math.
I mean, I was not going to play the devil's advocate. Yeah, so my son, one of my sons, is currently going through one of those crises that is a regular occurrence amongst high schoolers, which is, what am I going to need this for? Or even declaring, I'm not going to need this. Right. So I wonder, and I'm not going to do any couching or framing. I just wonder how you would handle that if someone said that to you. Why do I need to study this? Um, what's your response? And I'm sure you've responded to that question before.
Oh, yes. Well, whether you are playing an instrument, whether you're playing video games, whether you're interested in space or architect, there will be math in each of those subjects. And I think if a child especially, but anybody is struggling with wanting to know, when am I ever going to use this, or why do I need to know math? You need to find where they're at and where their interests lie. One of my friends that I met, about 4 years ago, her then 10-year-old was interested in quantum physics. And he would move along the lines in his interest until he came to where he needed to know the math. And then he would learn the math, which is very opposite of your normal progression.
Mm-hmm.
But his parents were very laid back in that they would allow him to follow his interest to the point that he needed math. And then they would say, okay, well, now we need to learn the math that goes along with this.
So we've got our audience has not gotten over the pun and math jokes thing yet. Scott has a joke for us, which I am ashamed to say I don't get.
I get it. Yes, that's a good one.
Okay, I mean, and you know what? I love that your instinct was not to explain the joke, because who wants to explain a joke?
So it kind of makes it not as fun anymore.
Right, you're right. Exactly, it
Right.
kills the joke. But Daniel also comments that going back to puns, that in language development, learning, if you could understand the puns and asterisks, you were ready to be a missionary in France. Now, so let's keep riffing off of, let's, I think, combine the last two threads. You mentioned that math is a language. Okay, so how does studying math well and diligently shape our minds, right? Let's say that somehow, this doesn't happen, and we don't want kids to think this happens, but let's say that a kid lives his life or her life as an adult nearly math-free, right? Still, there must have been some benefit to the fact that that child studied math well and diligently. How does math shape our minds?
Well, I think it shapes your character and your mind in learning to sit down, focus, work step by step through a problem, and be diligent in what you're putting your hand to. So I would say that helps your focus and shaping of your mind.
Yeah, when I was a youth, I really enjoyed math. As long as I studied, even though I was telling you off camera that my mom struggled to make me do my math once I hit like my junior year of high school. I loved math class. I loved studying math. And I think, like, for me, and everyone finds their own reasons to enjoy it. I think for me, it was because it was like a language. I enjoyed, and I've always loved languages, but I liked studying math more than I liked studying formal grammar. And I think that's because, a lot of people look at, equations and they think, well, this is so dry. But math actually feels living, like you're interacting with music, with a language. Or sometimes I think, it's easy to take grammar over the cliff, and cut the language up so it's not alive anymore. The math is alive as itself at whatever level you're interacting with it.
Yes. Well, I found it very interesting when I was just researching some different, say, subjects that you wouldn't maybe consider math in. My youngest will follow his other siblings in studying math and motion this fall, and it talks about music theory
Hmm.
and music producers and engineers. If you've heard of auto-tune,
Hmm.
they actually use trigonometric functions calculator to alter the sound waves, the patterns. Now, there's not necessarily an exact match with the sine and cosine functions, but there is a graphical representation formed using the sound waves. And so I found that fascinating as well. And you can use the different harmonics, and you can apply a lot of math to music.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes. That's and it's interesting to how musicians so often approach music mathematically. It's not just that mathematicians approach music, but musicians approach math because of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking here at your courses, and I notice. So first of all, you have Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, but it's Algebra 1 with half a geometry, and Algebra 2 with half a geometry, and then pre-calculus with trigonometry. And you mentioned that you get a half credit of geometry in any of those courses. Now you use Shorman, so I'm curious to know, why you chose that curriculum, and I'd like you to talk about what the idea behind combining algebra with math with geometry is.
Well, actually, that is a Shorman feature,
Hmm.
and it is a step on the Saxon as well.
Yes.
So he takes the Saxon math and builds off of that foundation. And so Saxon math really integrates the geometry and the algebra as well. And Dr. Shorman says the integration of geometry and algebra saves time, making learning geometry easier, building long-term retention, and raising the standards, raising standardized test scores as well. One of the reasons we started using Shorman math is we were using Saxon math in classical conversations.
Hmm.
And my children were doing some better than others in the spiral approach. And we found Shorman math with the videos was very helpful for my children. And he also brings in more applicable math as well. He'll throw in some chemistry problems or some physics problems. He'll introduce calculus at the Algebra 1 level and just start talking and using the grammar, using the words, so that by the time the students get to the pre-calculus or the calculus, the word calculus is not so scary.
Right. Yeah.
And so we've really enjoyed that approach to the different levels of math. And he even brings in some linear algebra as well. It doesn't make it seems more integrated. It doesn't seem so cut and dried in that aspect. But I
Right.
did find that my children still needed to have conversations with the math, which is where we bring in the math as a language. And Dr. Shorman also sees math as a language. And so I see my courses as the didactic or the instructional portion using the Shorman videos, and then we have conversations about
Hmm.
math, much like learning a language, a foreign language, where you would study the grammar, you would practice the sentence structure, and then you would meet with somebody live once a
Right.
week and have a conversation in that language. You don't want to learn a foreign language where you're only doing the bookwork, where you're only doing worksheets. You
That's
want to have
absolutely right.
conversations as well. And that's where I come in. That's
Hmm.
my role, is to help have conversations with the students so that when they're learning about a tangent line, I can say, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Oh, I don't know. I just wrote this down. Well, what is the definition of it? And then they can recite the definition, but they still don't necessarily know what they're talking about.
Right. And for those of you who are viewing who maybe are not that familiar with classical education, what you're hearing is a teacher who is thoroughly just immersed in that world. Using the word integration and valuing integration as a key part of education. But then you're describing a flipped classroom. You're describing recitations. So, maybe, and focusing on conversation and interaction. So maybe describe what a week in one of your classes looks like?
Well, a week in one of my classes will look a little bit different than the spring session that we just completed.
Oh, I've
Because
been
we
telling
met,
my Spanish students that because several have talked about registering for Spanish 1 in the fall. And I'm like, it's going to be a whole other ball game. So
yes.
buckle up.
Well, in our spring session, we had students who were using a variety of different curricula and were on different levels. Um, Whereas in the fall, we would say move through 4 different lessons in the Shoreman math and then come together once a week. Right now, I think all my classes are scheduled for Wednesday. We'll see if that stays on or if we add any classes besides the Wednesdays. But right now on Wednesdays, and then we will have a little review of what we've learned in the 4 different lessons and see if anyone has any questions. And then one of the my spring classes, they did see my layered approach to the problems. So I like to help the kids look, and this is more the classical method as well, where you look through a problem. We take, I call it 3 scans. The first scan is, have you seen this problem before? Now, of course, in the fall classes, we should have all seen the problem because we would have just completed those exercises. And then the second scan, what do you see? What do you know? And what are you looking for? And as you train your brain to recite through those 3 questions, you can make sure that you're asking or answering the question that's being asked. Sometimes students want to just dive in and solve the problem without really knowing what they're looking for. And this also helps calm them down in maybe even a testing situation where they can say, okay, you know what? Maybe I haven't seen this problem before, but what do I see? Okay, I see some numbers, I see some operators, I see some variables. Oh, there's X, the infamous X. And then what do I know? Let's list what I know. And it can, as you train your brain to work through that method, you can then say, what am I looking for? And then how is my brain telling me to solve the problem? That's not always the correct way to solve it, but you can start. Whereas sometimes if you don't know, if you don't have a plan, you'll just freeze. Oh, I don't know this,
Right.
and either guess or skip it.
Or if you do know it, I mean, I think that what you're describing, I imagine it would actually engage the student more with math and make math more interesting in the sense that it seems that so often students try to crank through the work to get it done,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the
Right.
student has learned that to do 30 questions takes a certain amount of time, right? And they're trying to get under that, and they're frustrated when they get over that. And every day it's we're just trying to mill through problems. And you see that in students who, for example, love puzzles or love grammar, right? But then they approach math and it's just like, and you just it hits them instead of them interacting with it, and then they just try to mill through it. When I imagine, maybe you can speak to this, that kind of training your brain to run through that routine would actually kind of give each problem the respect it's due and make it
Oh,
more
yes.
fun, I'd think.
And the third aspect is as we move through the classes, and I think I shocked some of my spring students during this time, I also train them to lead through the problems as well.
Mm.
And so they will take the reins on the problem and use the questions that we've practiced with the scans. And instead of me saying, okay, have you seen this problem before? What do you see? What do you know? They will start asking. And at first, they were a little concerned because they thought they needed to know everything. But once I reassured them, no, you don't need to know everything. You can ask your classmates.
Mm-hmm.
And they would then engage their classmates as well. So it helped with the bonding with the classmates in a virtual setting or in a physical setting, but even in a virtual setting where they can ask their questions to their classmates and call upon them and their knowledge as well. They can say, okay, what do you know? And call on their name.
Yeah.
And again, it as you learn to teach through a problem too, or as you can lead them through a problem, it also enhances your understanding of the information because I've seen
Of
the light bulb
course.
come on as students are either leading the problems or as they're answering the questions, all of a sudden they're like, whoa, I get now why we're doing this or how we're doing this.
Yes. I know I'm absolutely amazed right now over something I should not be amazed at. But what you're describing and that level of interactivity, and then the student, kind of leading the group through certain concepts or a certain problem, that was not my experience in school at all. And then when I started homeschooling, I homeschooled in isolation for most of that time. Hey, it was the 90s. We lived in the Northeast where, we didn't go outside, so no one would call the truancy officers. Anyway, so there, I never experienced that. So what's amazing me, and it shouldn't, is how much what you're describing is like teaching a language class. It's just teaching. And I know I shouldn't be amazed.
It's the language lab for math. It's the math language lab. Yes.
Beautiful. That's a very, very interesting approach. In fact,
very classical.
Ukashan says so interesting, and it is very classical. Exactly right. And it's really fascinating that you make that comment, because I think a lot of people, when they think of classical education, there's a certain classic template that you picture, and math is part of it, but really, like, what you envision is togas and declensions, right? That's I think what most of us think of first. That's the image that flashes to our mind. And at Kepler, we have we have a STEM emphasis. Because we recognize that perhaps those of us in classical Christian education have undervalued the hard sciences and mathematics.
Well, it's part of the liberal arts as well. The geometry, the mathematics, the harmonics, the music, however you want to.
And it goes down as right, exactly. Yeah, right, exactly. But it goes down as becomes clear as we talk to Mrs. Santoro, that it goes down even to teaching methods. Right, it's not an addendum, which I think
Correct.
is a temptation.
Oh no, it's very much integrated.
Right. So there was a joke, and I was not prepared to share this, but I really do want to. I don't think I'm gonna be able to find it, but there was something on Facebook I saw pop up several times recently. Let's see. Teaching. How does it go? Teaching science without the humanities is how you get Spider-Man villains. Teaching theater without the humanities is how you get Batman villains, which I thought was cute and funny. But the thing that most struck me about that joke was that it centered and redefined humanities from the humanities from our normal way of thinking, because so often we sling humanities and the liberal arts way out into the artistic side of things, so that theater is a part of the humanities, and then math and science is somewhere out there in the cold, where what the person who wrote this joke clearly viewed humanities as a center. And really, so for you, math is a part of the humanities.
Oh, absolutely.
Why is that so? To really put you on the spot.
I guess because it is found everywhere. It just, to me, it falls into the languages as well, because just like you wouldn't be able to communicate unless you had a common vocabulary and a common speech, or even common gestures, there is so much in life that has math in it that you need to be able to communicate using math terms or math rules or using math properties in everything from day-to-day life, whether you are, as Proverbs 31 woman, she selects the wool and flax. She works with her eager hands. She is like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar, it says, or she provides food for her family. She considers a field and then buys it. The Proverbs 31 woman has to know math.
Yeah, you can't buy a field without lots of math.
No, exactly. She sees that her trading is profitable. her lamp doesn't go out at night. Well, why doesn't her lamp go out at night? Because she bought enough oil. And so it is so integrated, whether you want to be an engineer or an astronaut,
Yes.
or whether you're a musician, like we spoke about earlier, there's just math everywhere. And it's just a matter of finding it and discovering how
Yes.
we can see it.
Well, I think if you want to be a good prose writer, I believe that you need to be at least a good appreciator of poetry. And if you want to be an appreciator or a writer of poetry, you have to love math. You can't you can't do it without math.
We
You know,
need to know math to to write a haiku.
right, right, exactly, yes. And there's to me, it's very interesting how with the language of math, you end up, you can, there are levels, so many levels of fluency, but you end up seeing it in the world around you. And we're named Kepler, and we're called Kepler because we want science and math to be an active part of what we do. But Kepler, the phrase "the music of the spheres" in talking about orbits and the movement of celestial bodies, that comes from Kepler's work. But the music of the spheres is expressed; it describes something. It describes rocks in the heavens, but it's expressed through math. I mean, math is a language of creation, the language of creation. I don't want to be the one to wax poetic about this when it could be our math teacher. So Kepler, I say Kepler Education. So I think this is Daniel. So math is language, as mentioned earlier. One example might be how the Cartesian coordinate system is the language for talking about geometric figures.
Oh, we really enjoyed breaking down the unit circle as well when talking about the sine, cosine, or even tangent functions. And one of my students was struggling a little bit with identifying what a graph looks like of the different functions. And I mentioned, well, first of all, memorize the different parts of the equation. That's the first step. Then go to this website and play with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the best ways to be able to see, not just memorizing the amplitude or the period or how it interacts, but watch it. Change this. What happens if you make it negative? What happens if you make it positive? What happens if you multiply it by 10 or divide it by 10? What does it do to the graph? And that really helps you can see the interaction with the trigonometric functions even more than just sitting and writing them down. And now, back when I was learning the trigonometric functions, if we had a graphing calculator, it was very tedious to input and to change those. But now it's just a matter of just changing the number on a website.
Okay. But yeah, it's funny how crotchety people can get about the old ways of doing things. I remember my dad. My dad is a mathematician of sorts with the work he does, and he used to talk about slide rules. Is that what? I don't even remember if that was exactly what they were called. I think I might be saying that.
I think so. No, that sounds right, but I never used one.
And we used to program computers with the punch cards. For him, that was like a badge of honor that he had, gone through using those tools. But I'm glad that there's a website. So that would be a great time, those of you who are watching, to ask very practical questions about homeschooling math, teaching and studying math. This would be a great time to ask specific questions, perhaps about your 14-year-old or what comes after, what you should be studying next, that sort of thing. So comments and questions are welcome. Ryan Griffiths says that this is an awesome conversation because no one ever told him why he was studying math. And that's such a common and woeful tale.
Yes, well now, especially with video games, you can see the application in the coding, or even digital imaging or interior design. There's just so much math that's out there.
Oh,
even
absolutely.
Baking chocolate chip cookies. You want to double the recipe, you need to know math.
Well, it's funny because, once students get to a certain level, I recommend that once my language students get to a certain level, I recommend that they begin playing cooperative video games with people who speak that language. And sometimes it can be a frustrating experience because there might be some impatience, but it is funny how integrated video games are, because at the same time you might be practicing your Spanish or your English. Yes. by cooperating, you're also instantly picturing angles as you decide whether you need to flank from this side or that side, or whether the guy can shoot you from the tower if you're behind this box. And there's you're instantly mathing, and so it's not just in video games, but in real life as you're deciding angles on a project or whatever, that you're doing math all the time. It's better to be fluent in the language.
Well, when my high school physics teacher, Mr. Sycamore, would talk about how he had trouble watching basketball games because he kept viewing all these vectors and all these angles as he was watching a game. So that stuck with me as well. And I thought that was very odd, but now that I'm teaching math and even with physics with my children, you can start seeing that and they think it's funny. But
yeah, oh, for sure. Well, I've really enjoyed having this conversation about math and the joys of math. I kind of want to finish with the following question. In your courses, Euclid is an optional text. Is that a correct way of saying it?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, an optional resource, I think, is listed in 2 of your courses. And then Mathematics is God Silent by James Nichol is an optional resource in your pre-calc with trig. So I wonder if you would talk. I please talk about Euclid and how you would recommend that he be used with your algebra courses, and then with pre-calculus. Why did you choose that particular book?
Well, those actually should be resources for all 3 books. And I'm reading through the Mathematics is God Silent currently, so I'm hoping to use it more after I finished it over the summer. But the Euclid and Euler's as well, I like to tie in. In fact, Dr. Shorman was the one in his classes that started quoting more of the original text, of the fathers of algebra, the fathers of calculus, and so as I started studying math more from a teaching aspect, I realized, okay, it's not just these formulas that are in the books. They come from somewhere. And so much as the original documents are used in other courses, it's fun to be able to go back and to see where does it come from. Mm-hmm. And even if it's as a resource to start with, or eventually I would kind of like to use it as the core book in a future class. I'm just not there yet.
Yeah.
And so as you look back and you go, oh, okay, well, what do we know? One of the questions I also like to ask my students is, before we start diving into, say, a triangle, what do you know about triangles? Mm-hmm. And I think some of the assessments are going to look more like the blue books that were in college. And in classical conversations, we've been using blue books for 7 or 8 years, where it's a good assessment of what a student knows, rather than just, here, take this test, take this multiple choice test, do you know it? To say, what do you know about it? And to have them write down everything that they know, say, about a triangle, everything from 3 angles to 3 sides to some of the trigonometric functions. And it's more difficult, of course, to grade because it takes more time, or I shouldn't say more difficult, but it takes more time than running it through a machine. But I think it gives a more accurate assessment of a student's knowledge of the subject.
Yeah, and that for me kind of connects to your teaching methods and to enjoying studying math. I took Euclidean geometry in college, and it was a class designed for freshmen, but I took it when I was in my early 20s, and I still remember how delighted I was by it. And as I said, I think I described earlier how I kind of gave up on math For whatever reason, I just got distracted, and I decided in high school, and I decided I wanted to do other things. And I don't think we ever really approached sometimes the difficulty sometimes of homeschooling and teaching math. But anyway, with Euclidean geometry, I remembered how much, because I didn't stop doing math because I hated math. I just decided as a teenager that I wanted to be doing other things. I volunteered at the Science Museum. I worked at a bookstore, and I shouldn't have done it, but I did. And I even managed to go through years of college without studying any math, which is outrageous, especially given who my dad was. But then I took this Euclidean geometry class, and it absolutely delighted me. And I think what it did was, it used conversation and language, English in my case, to approach and describe math. And so this touches on what I'm hearing from you, I think, because you're teaching math through conversation, not just Euclidean geometry, but you want to teach math through conversation. And that really, as I said earlier in the stream, strikes me as a delightful way to teach and study math, to talk about it.
Well, it also can get you into trouble as well, because I am not the expert at math. And so I will talk myself into a corner sometimes. And it becomes a little bit frustrating, especially for, say, some of the Algebra 1 students, if I say, well, what if we do this? Or what happens if this? And we end up more on the lines of Algebra 2 or even calculus. They're not too happy about that.
No.
But and it shows that I still have so much to learn as well. And as a new online teacher, that's not always the best thing, to sometimes talk yourself into a corner.
Oh, right. Yes. Well, I think every teacher could be indulged rarely and occasionally for, going off on an enthusiastic tangent. I could see that happening. I guess it's a small price to pay for that level of conversation and interactivity.
Good math term, tangent.
Boom. It is a language. Well,
one of the shirts my son has is sometimes I go off on and shows a tangent line. So that's
nice.
One of our math joke shirts.
Well, I hope he has a very happy birthday.
Thank you.
And I've really appreciated you coming here and talking math and high schoolers. So those of you who are watching, we're excited to have you guys come on board. Take a look at Jillene Santoro's courses. You will find below this video, you will find a link to Jillene Santoro's profile on Kepler. Jillene, thank you so much for being here. And if you actually just stay on the line afterwards, and we can chat a little bit. But anyway, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Joffrey.
Bye-bye, everybody.